My name is Harold Jensen, and most folks around Sedalia just call me Hal. The night 900 people stood up and applauded my 40 years at the bank was the same night I finally understood what my son-in-law had been planning to do with my farm. In the front row of that ballroom sat one empty chair with a little white card on it, and the card had my daughter's name printed in gold letters, and 2 television cameras made sure the whole state of Missouri saw it. By 9 o'clock that evening, I had 137 missed calls on my phone, and a man was standing in my gravel driveway in a suit that cost more than my first truck, begging me to sign a single piece of paper. I did not sign it. I did not need to raise my voice either, because 4 months earlier, without telling a soul, I had already beaten him to the county courthouse. But to understand how an old bankman ended up in a fight like that, you have to go back to the beginning. Before I take you there, let me say one thing. If stories about family, loyalty, and quiet justice mean something to you, take 1 second and subscribe, because I promise you will want to hear how this one ends. I spent 40 years at Cornerstone Savings Bank, most of them in the trust department. People imagine banking is about money. It is not. It is about paper, deeds, wills, powers of attorney, beneficiary forms. For 40 years, families trusted me to read the fine print they could not bear to read themselves. I learned early that a signature takes 3 seconds and can undo 3 generations. So I developed a habit. Before I sign anything, I read every page, and I mark the bottom corner of every page I have read with a red pencil. The same red pencil, more or less, since 1986. My wife Ruth used to laugh about it. She said I was the only man in Pettis County who proofread the church bulletin. Ruth and I bought our place the year our daughter Megan was born. 160 acres of pasture and timber south of Sedalia, with a white farmhouse that needed more work than the seller admitted. We were not farmers, not really. I rented the ground to a neighbor and kept a garden and a shop, but that land was our answer to a question we asked each other as newlyweds. Where do we want to grow old? The answer was there. Under the bur oak Ruth planted by the back porch the spring Megan learned to walk. We lived simple, not because we had to, because we believed money should buy security, not attention. Church on Sunday mornings, casserole suppers, a used station wagon that I drove until the odometer gave up counting. I hated that car, if I am honest. But the transmission repair cost less than 1 semester of Megan's textbooks at the University of Missouri, and every dollar in our house had a destination. Her future. Megan grew up good, smart, stubborn in the ways that serve a person well. She went into marketing up in Kansas City, and she was good at it, good at making things look right. I used to tease her that she got paid to do with pictures what I got paid to undo with paperwork. She would roll her eyes and hug me anyway. Then Ruth got sick. Ovarian cancer. It moved faster than any of us were ready for. 6 years ago this fall, I held my wife's hand in our bedroom, in the house we had promised to grow old in, and I listened to her breathing, slow down until it stopped. Half of me stopped with it. Grief does strange things to the people left behind. For me, it made the house quiet. For Megan, it made the house hard to visit. I understood that, or I told myself I did. Every corner of that farm had her mother in it, so the visits got shorter. The calls got further apart. Dad, can I call you back? Dad, we are slammed this weekend. Dad, maybe next month. Months turned into seasons. Seasons turned into years. I never kept score. Good parents do not keep score. But I noticed, and somewhere in those years, Blake happened. Blake Ashford married my daughter 8 years ago. He called himself a senior wealth advisor at a firm in Kansas City, and he looked the part. Firm handshake, teeth like a catalog. He carried a leather folio with his initials stamped on the corner, and I never once saw him set it down, not at Thanksgiving, not at a funeral. Ruth was polite to him. Ruth was polite to everybody. But one night after they left, she stood at the sink drying dishes and said, quiet as anything, "That man talks to you like you are a client he has not landed yet." I laughed at the time. I should have written it down. I want to be fair here. Blake was never cruel to my daughter. He was attentive in the way a salesman is attentive. And little by little, Megan's opinions started arriving pre-owned. If Blake thought the farm was too much house for one old man, that became Megan's worry too. If Blake thought holidays were better spent at resorts, That became the new tradition. My daughter did not disappear all at once. She faded, one weekend at a time. That is the part nobody warns you about. Then came the second Saturday in March of this year, and everything I am about to tell you started right there, at my own kitchen table. Blake showed up alone, which was unusual. He brought coffee from the drive-thru in town, which was more unusual. He set his leather folio on my table, opened it, and slid a stack of papers across to me with that catalog smile. Just some routine account housekeeping, Hal. Beneficiary reviews, updated contact forms. The firm makes us do it every year. Sign where the tabs are and I will handle the rest. Now, I spent 40 years watching people say, sign where the tabs are. So I did what I have always done. I put on my reading glasses, took out my red pencil, and started on page 1. Blake checked his watch twice before I finished page 3. The first several pages were exactly what he said. Address confirmations, a form updating phone numbers. Then, page 8. The heading said, Durable Power of Attorney, naming Blake Ashford as my agent. Full authority over financial affairs. Effective immediately upon signing. And behind it, tucked in like a grocery receipt, a beneficiary designation moving my accounts, and a fresh deed form for the farm with 2 names typed where one used to be. I did not look up. I marked the corner of page 8 with my red pencil, same as every other page. Then I stacked the papers, squared the edges, and said, well, this is more reading than I expected. Leave it with me, and I will get it back to you. Blake's smile flickered, just for a half second, like a light in a storm. Then it came back full strength. Of course, no rush at all. He left. I sat at that table until the coffee went cold in my hand. I was not angry yet. Anger came later. Right then I mostly heard Ruth's voice, the thing she used to tell me whenever Megan broke our hearts as a teenager. Do not decide anything while you are hurting. Wait until you can think. So I waited 2 days. Then I called Carl Whitfield. Carl and I go back to the farm crisis in the 80s, when he was a young estate lawyer and I was a young loan officer and half the county was drowning. He is retired now, but retired lawyers are like retired bird dogs. They still point. We met at the diner on Ohio Street, and I slid the unsigned stack across the booth, the way Blake had slid it across my table. Carl read for a long time. Then he took off his glasses and said the sentence I have repeated to every friend my age since. A power of attorney is the most dangerous document in America, because nobody reads it until it is too late. He tapped page 8. If you had signed this, that boy could have borrowed against your farm, moved your accounts, and never had to ask you a thing. All legal, all quiet. I asked him what a man in my position ought to do. And Carl gave me 2 pieces of advice that shaped everything that followed. First, he said, do not confront him yet. An unsigned form is not a crime. It is an intention. Accuse your daughter's husband with no proof of harm, and you will lose your daughter, not him. Let him step over the line where everyone can see it. Second, he said, you of all people know there is paperwork that protects, not just paperwork that steals. Go make some. That is how, on a Tuesday morning in April, I ended up at the Pettis County Courthouse, standing at the recorder's counter across from Dorothy Pruitt, who has worked that office longer than some of the marble has. I recorded a beneficiary deed on the farm. For those who have never heard of one, it is worth knowing, and you can look this up yourself. Missouri was the first state in the whole country to allow beneficiary deeds. It lets you name who gets your land when you die, while you keep full ownership and full control as long as you live. You can revoke it, change it, tear it up. But Dorothy said the part that matters, and she said it the way you say something you have watched families learn the hard way. A beneficiary deed only counts if it is recorded here before you pass. Paper sitting in a drawer is just paper. I recorded mine. Where I pointed that deed, I will tell you in time. What matters is this. From that Tuesday in April forward, no signature Blake could ever charm, pressure, or slip out of me would touch that farm. The ground was already spoken for. He just did not know it yet. And then, in May, the bank changed everything. Cornerstone Savings was turning 100 years old, and the board decided to throw a centennial celebration at the convention hall. The kind of thing with a stage and a program and a regional television station covering it, because the bank had become one of the biggest employers in that corner of Missouri. Somewhere in the planning, somebody noticed that exactly one living employee had served 40 years. Me. I told the president, Tom Brandt, that a handshake and a sheet cake in the break room would suit me fine. Tom started at Cornerstone as, Hal, you spent 40 years taking care of this bank's people. For one afternoon, let them take care of you. A week later, I drove up to Kansas City and handed Megan the invitation myself. She opened it on her front step, and for a moment I saw my little girl again, the one who used to sit under my desk at the branch coloring on deposit slips. Dad, this is on television. She hugged me. Of course I will be there. I would not miss it for anything. I believed her. Every word. Because no matter how old your child gets, part of you always believes the promises they make. The call came on Friday evening, the night before the ceremony. Hey, Dad. Her voice was cheerful. Too cheerful. The way a room is too clean. Listen, something came up. Blake got us into this retreat in Arizona. It is a work thing. His biggest clients will be there, and the flights are tomorrow morning. I stood at my kitchen window looking at Ruth's bur oak moving in the evening breeze, and I asked, quietly, so the tickets are already bought. There was a pause that lasted 1 second too long. Well, not yet exactly, but Blake says, and then I heard him in the background, smooth as creek water. Tell him we will celebrate properly when we are back, someplace nice. Megan came back on. Dad, you are not upset, right? It is just a ceremony. I looked at that old oak for a while. Then I said, No, sweetheart. I am 71 years old. I have learned not to sweat the small stuff. She laughed, relieved, and we said our goodbyes. And I stood there holding a dead phone in a quiet kitchen. Here is what I did not say. I did not say that a work retreat booked the night before, with no tickets bought, smelled like a story. I did not say that I would learn, later, exactly what was scheduled at that resort in Arizona, and who Blake had arranged for my daughter to have lunch with. I did not guilt her. I did not beg. Ruth's rule. Do not decide anything while you are hurting. Instead, I scrolled down my contacts to a name I have never once had to call twice. Grace Hagan answered on the second ring. Mr. Jensen, everything all right? I said, Grace, I have a favor to ask. And she said the 4 words that put a lump in my throat before I even asked it. Anything. Name it. Done. The bank is holding a ceremony tomorrow, I told her. 40 years. There is a seat beside me that has come open, and I would be honored if you would sit in it. The line went quiet. Then, soft, are you sure you want me there? And I said, Grace, if your dad were alive, that seat would already be his. Her voice cracked on the answer. Then I will be there for both of us. Now I have to stop and tell you about Walt Hagan, because none of the rest of this makes sense without him. Walt farmed 600 acres east of town, and he became my friend the way farm crisis friendships got made in the 80s, which is to say, across a desk with a foreclosure file between us. The bank wanted his ground. I found another way, restructured him, drove out to his place at night more than once to redo the numbers at his kitchen table. He never forgot it, and he never let me pay for coffee again as long as he lived. But the debt between us ran the other direction, and it ran deeper. In November of 1994, Walt and I took his duck boat out on Truman Lake in weather we had no business being out in. A wake caught us wrong, and we went over into water cold enough to stop your heart from surprise alone. My waders filled. I went down like a sack of feed, and Walt Hagan, who was about to become a father for the first time that winter, did not swim for shore. He swam for me. He got a fist in my collar, and he kicked for 100 yards of freezing water, and when we crawled out on the bank, he laid there heaving and laughing at the sky. The doctor in town said another few minutes in that water would have finished me. Walt never spoke of it again. When anyone called him a hero, he would shrug and say, You would have done the same. Maybe I would have. He never gave me the chance to find out. That baby he was about to have was Grace, born a few months after her daddy pulled me out of that lake, which means, and I have thought about this more times than I can count, that girl has known me one day longer than she has known anything. Lung cancer took Walt 12 years ago. The night before he died, he sent everyone out of the room but me. He was down to whispers by then. He took my hand and he said, Look after my girl. I told him he would not have to ask twice. He smiled and said, I know. Those were the last words my friend ever spoke to me. Grace was 20 then, too young to lose her father, too proud to take a dime from me, I offered. She refused, polite as her mother, stubborn as Walt. So I helped the way you help proud people, which is sideways. A word to a friend about affordable housing near her nursing school. A retired mechanic who kept her old truck alive for the cost of parts. A seat in the audience at her nursing school pinning ceremony, because I had promised her father, and because by then I wanted to be there anyway. Grace became a hospice nurse. Rural routes, long drives, holding hands in farmhouses at 2 a.m. Some people told her she could make more money in the city. She would just say, "The city has enough people. Out here, sometimes I am the only one who comes." And here is the part I cannot tell without stopping to steady myself. 6 years ago, when the cancer took hold of my Ruth and the hospital sent us home with a folder of pamphlets and a schedule of visits, the nurse who knocked on our farmhouse door, carrying her kit and her father's old green thermos, was Grace Hagan. She never once treated it like an assignment. For 11 weeks, she treated my wife like family, because as far as Grace was concerned, we were. The morning Ruth passed, Grace was the one who made the phone calls I could not make, and then she sat with me on the back porch under the bur oak and did not say one single word, which was exactly the right number. Since then, every couple of weeks, her truck finds my driveway. Gutters get cleaned before I notice they are full. The furnace gets looked at before the first freeze. "Figured you could use another set of hands," she says, carrying her toolbox up my steps. That is the kind of woman she became, not because anyone rewarded her, because that is who Walt raised. So no, it was not a hard decision who to call on that Friday night. Saturday afternoon, the convention hall held over 900 people, bank staff going back 5 decades, farmers I had known since their fathers ran their places, retired tellers, county officials, a television crew from the regional station near the stage. Grace met me out front wearing a navy dress and her mother's little pearl earrings, standing straighter than half the executives walking past her. "You clean up all right," I told her. She laughed. "This is my one funeral and wedding dress, so behave yourself." Then she handed me a small gift bag. Inside was a leather notebook, and on the first page, in her careful nurse's handwriting, one sentence. "Some men build accounts. You built people." Dad knew the difference, and so do I. It took me a minute before I could talk. We sat in the front row. Beside us, one chair stayed empty, with a white card in gold letters, reserved for Megan Ashford. Nobody asked where she was. In a town our size, nobody has to. An empty chair speaks plenty loud on its own. At 2 o'clock, the lights went down and the screens filled with another lifetime. There I was in 1986, skinny tie, hair I no longer own. There was Ruth at the bank Christmas party in her red clearance rack dress, prettier than anything in that room before or since. There was Megan, 7 years old on Family Day, sitting in my desk chair with her feet nowhere near the floor, telling the branch manager she was going to run the place someday. My chest went tight. Funny how life turns. Then came the witnesses, and I promise you I had not been warned about any of it. A farmer named Elmer stood up and told 900 people how, in the worst of the 80s, a young lone man drove out after supper, week after week, and redid the numbers at kitchen tables until families could keep their ground. He looked right at me and said, "I am standing here tonight because that man refused to let the bank take my daddy's farm." Grace reached over and squeezed my arm. A retired teller told how her little girl needed hearing aids the insurance would not cover, and how an envelope appeared in her locker with no name on it, and how it took her 20 years to figure out whose handwriting was on the outside. And a man from the county talked about the flood in '93, when the river came up and half the town filled sandbags for 3 days straight, and how the trust officer from Cornerstone was out there in the rain with everybody else, and then spent the next month helping folks file the paperwork to rebuild. I had honestly forgotten some of it. When you help somebody, you are not supposed to keep the receipt. Tom Brandt called me up and handed me a heavy crystal award with my name and 40 years cut into it, and the applause went on long enough to embarrass a statue. Then the master of ceremonies smiled and said, "Mr. Jensen, we could not help noticing the young lady beside you. Would you tell us who she is?" I looked down at Grace, who looked like she wanted the floor to open up, and I stepped to the microphone. Her name is Grace Hagan, I said. 32 years ago this fall, her father Walt pulled me out of Truman Lake when I had no business coming out of it. A few months later, Grace was born. So the way I count it, she has been looking out for me her whole life. The room chuckled, soft. Then I said the rest. When cancer took Walt, he asked me for one thing. Look after my girl, I said. But here is the truth nobody planned. 6 years ago, when my wife Ruth was dying, the hospice nurse who came down our driveway, the one who held my wife's hand at the end, was this same Grace. I had to stop there for a second. The hall was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning. So I made a promise to her father, I finally said. But somewhere along the way, she took over the looking after. And if anyone on this earth deserved to sit in that seat today, it is her. 900 people stood up. Grace pressed her hand flat over her mouth, and on the big screen I watched a tear go right down over her father's stubborn chin. I thought that was the end of it. Then Tom came back to the microphone with a folder and said, "Actually, there is one more piece of business, and it is 100 years in the making." He opened the folder. 12 years ago, this bank offered Hal Jensen a series of retention bonuses. He turned down every one. Instead, he asked the board to set that money aside in a fund, and he wrote us a letter I want to read from. Tom looked up at me first. He hates this, folks. Laughter, warm. Then he read my own forgotten words back to me. Money disappears. Character compounds. Put this where it will still be paying interest on kindness long after I am gone. For 12 years, Tom said, that fund grew quietly. Bank matches, investment gains, gifts from retired officers. As of this morning, the Cornerstone Legacy Fund stands at $750,000. The gasp moved through that hall like wind through wheat. Even I had not known the number, and the founding agreement, Tom said, grants Hal exactly one privilege. He alone chooses the first recipient. Then Tom looked past me, straight at the front row. Grace Hagan, would you please join us on stage? Grace did not move. I had to take her hand and walk her up myself, her knees going like a new colt's. When Tom said the words, the first legacy award, $750,000, for a life spent showing up, she just shook her head and whispered, "There has been a mistake." Tom smiled. "There has not." She turned to me with her eyes flooded and asked me the same thing Daniel in every story like mine has ever asked. "Why?" "Because your father saved my life," I said. "And because you have spent 32 years being worth it." The ovation would not quit. And somewhere in Arizona, beside a resort pool, my daughter and her husband were watching every second of it on live television. I drove home alone in my pickup and sat in the driveway a while, the way you do after a day too big to carry inside all at once. My phone had been off since noon. When I turned it on, it buzzed so long I thought it was broken. 137 missed calls. Megan, Blake, numbers I did not know. 2 reporters, a cousin I had not heard from since Ruth's funeral. While I was still staring at it, it rang again. Megan. "Hi, sweetheart." "Dad." She was breathing fast. "Dad, why didn't you tell me?" "Tell you what?" I asked, though I knew. "The money. $750,000. You knew. I knew there would be a gift. I did not know the size, and honey, you did not ask. You had a retreat." Silence. Then small. "We are at the airport. We are coming home tonight." I told her the truth. "The ceremony is over, Megan. There is nothing left to attend." And she said something that gave me the first sliver of hope I had felt in years. "This is not about the ceremony, Dad. I watched you on that screen and I did not recognize my own life." Then the phone changed hands, and the Creekwater voice came on. "Hal, listen. People online are twisting this, making Megan look terrible, that empty chair business. We should get ahead of it, the 3 of us. Maybe put out a little statement. And while we are all together, there is some paperwork we never finished up." There it was. His wife in tears at an airport, and Blake was thinking about the paperwork. "I will be home all evening," I said, and hung up. By dark, the clips were everywhere. The empty chair, the lake story, the number, comment sections, filling up with strangers telling stories about their own quiet parents and their own missed ceremonies. I did not enjoy it. Those strangers knew one afternoon. They did not know my daughter. Megan was not cruel, and she was not greedy. She had simply spent years believing there would always be another chance, another dinner, another ceremony, another tomorrow. Life has a hard way of proving otherwise. Headlights turned into my driveway a little after 9. 2 doors closed. My daughter came up the porch steps looking 10 years older than that morning. Blake came behind her, carrying his leather folio. Inside, Megan stopped at the wall of photographs. Her at 6 with her first ribbon from the county fair. Her at 16 with the car keys. The 3 of us at her college graduation, Ruth between us, smiling so bright it still hurts to look at. Megan swallowed. I have not been here in a long time. No, I said. You have not. Blake set the folio on my kitchen table, out of habit, I suppose, the way a carpenter sets down his hammer. Hal, before anything else, I think we should talk strategy. The optics of tonight. Sit down, Blake, I said. We are going to talk all right. But I go first. I went to the spare room and came back with 3 storage boxes, and my daughter recognized them before I set them down. Those are Mom's, she whispered. Open them, I said. The first box was paper, because with me it is always paper. Tuition statements from the University of Missouri, with paid in full stamped across the top, semester after semester. The canceled checks behind her wedding, the photographer, the flowers, the hall, the loan file for the down payment on her first house, with my co-signature quietly removed 2 years later once she did not need it. Megan turned the pages with shaking hands. I thought scholarships covered school. Some of it, I said. I thought Grandpa helped with the wedding. No, sweetheart. She looked up. Why did you never say anything? Because parents do not raise children to collect thank you notes. We raise them, because that is the job. The second box was photographs. Ruth sewing a fair ribbon back onto a dress at midnight after a 12-hour nursing shift. Me up on our own roof one August because a contractor would have cost a semester of textbooks. Camping at the lake instead of hotels. Birthday cakes from our oven instead of a bakery box. Not because we were poor. Because every extra dollar in that house had one destination, and that destination was sitting at my table crying. The third box was letters. Every birthday card Ruth ever wrote her. Every note tucked into a grade school lunchbox. Megan unfolded one from her wedding morning, paper gone soft from her mother's hands, and read it out loud until her voice quit on her. My darling girl, houses and jobs will come and go. At the end, love is measured in one currency only. Marry someone who shows up. Be someone who shows up. Time is the only gift that cannot be bought back. My daughter put her head down on her mother's letter and wept like the little girl under my desk at the branch. And I will say this to you watching, right here at the hardest part of my story. If you have someone who sacrificed for you in silence, do not wait for a ceremony to tell them you finally see it. And if this story is reaching you the way that letter reached my daughter, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe, because what happened in that kitchen next is the reason I am telling it at all. Because Blake picked that exact moment to clear his throat and reach for his folio. This is a lot of emotion, he said, and emotion is exactly why families need structure. Hal, those forms from March. Given tonight, given your exposure, we really should finalize them. Megan lifted her head. What forms from March? So I opened the kitchen drawer and took out a manila envelope, and I laid his own stack of papers on the table, every page marked in the bottom corner with red pencil. Your husband brought me these 4 months ago, I said. Routine housekeeping, he called it. Page 8 is a durable power of attorney naming Blake over everything I own. Behind it is a new deed form for this farm. Megan turned to page 8 and read it the way I taught her to read things, slowly, all the way down. Then she said, in a hollow voice, almost word for word, the sentence Carl said in that diner booth. This would have let you do anything you wanted, and no one would have had to ask Dad a thing. Blake reached for the papers. She moved them out of his reach. Those red marks mean he read every page, she said quietly. You told me his memory was slipping. You told me the Arizona trip was to meet an estate lawyer, for his own protection. His own protection, I said, and looked at Blake. Son, how much do you owe? The catalog smile finally broke. It is complicated, he said. Business cycles, the syndication. How much? Megan said. $260,000, he said, to the table. Personally guaranteed. The note comes due in 90 days, and the state securities people have been asking questions, and I just needed collateral. It was only ever going to be temporary, Hal. The farm would have. The farm, I said, was never available. And here is the last thing I will teach you about paperwork, Blake, free of charge, since you sell it for a living. Back in April, I recorded a beneficiary deed on this place at the Pettis County Courthouse. This state invented that deed, first in the country, and it has one rule. It only counts if it is on record before I die. Mine is on record. It has been on record since spring. Every plan you built on this ground was built on ground you never had. Blake stood there with both arms wrapped around that leather folio like it was the last dry thing in Truman Lake. Megan walked to the front door and opened it. "Go to your mother's," she said. "Do not be at the house when I get home." He started to say her name and she said, "Only, you heard me." The screen door clapped shut behind him, and his headlights backed down my driveway, and neither of us moved to watch them go. A few minutes later, there was a soft knock, and I opened the door to Grace, holding a pot of chicken soup and her father's old green thermos. "I figured nobody in this house remembered to eat today," she said, and then saw Megan and froze. "I can come back." "No," Megan said, standing up. "Please stay." And my daughter watched, the way you watch something that rearranges you, while Grace moved through that kitchen without asking a single question. She knew which cabinet held the bowls. She knew the coffee maker sticks unless you push the switch twice. She knew because for 6 years she had been coming down my driveway while my own child was busy. Megan said quietly, "You have been taking care of my dad." And Grace, embarrassed, said the truest sentence of the whole night. "He took care of my family first. I am just keeping the books balanced." 3 of us ate soup at that old table until nearly midnight. Nobody gave a speech. Healing almost never starts with a speech. Mostly it starts with a meal. The weeks after went the only way that counts, which is slowly and steadily. Megan called every morning. Not to explain, not to ask for anything. Just, "How are you today, Dad?" At first I wondered if guilt was doing the dialing. But guilt gets tired. Consistency does not. She filed for divorce quietly that fall. No courtroom drama, and the securities people went on asking Blake their questions without any help needed from me. One evening on the porch, she said the wisest thing I ever heard her say. "I do not even blame him most, Dad. I blame the part of me that confused your patience for permission." One Saturday, she showed up with tomato plants and went out to the shed and came back wearing her mother's old garden gloves, and we put in a row along the south fence where Ruth always did. Halfway through, she sat back on her heels in the dirt and laughed and cried at the same time, and I did not ask which one it was, because it was both, and both was right. Grace, meanwhile, did exactly what Walt would have done with that money, which is give most of it away. She set up scholarships for rural nursing students, kids from little towns who want to come home and serve little towns. At the announcement, a reporter asked her what she would spend on herself, and she said, "Well, my truck makes a noise." Then she thought about it and said, "No, my father earned that truck. I will keep it running." In October, the bank turned the fund into a permanent mentorship program, pairing retired officers with young people going into service careers, and they held a small dedication. No cameras this time, no surprises. When I walked into that room, the front row was already occupied. Megan on one side, there 40 minutes early, because, she said, "I am never letting a chair with my name on it sit empty again." Grace on the other side, in the funeral and wedding dress. One of them mine by blood, one of them mine by a promise. Family, I have decided, is not weakened by gratitude. It is held together by it. There is one more thing, and I have not told either of those girls, so it stays between you and me. Last month I drove back to the courthouse and stood at Dorothy's counter and recorded a new beneficiary deed. Half of this farm now goes to the scholarship fund, so that Walt's name and Ruth's name keep paying interest on kindness long after I am gone. And the other half goes to my daughter. Megan does not know. She does not need to. Trust that got broken with paperwork can get quietly rebuilt with paperwork, and some things you simply record and let love find them later. Dorothy stamped it and looked at the names and smiled and said, "Looks like everything is in order, Mr. Jensen." For the first time in a long while, it truly was. If this story reminded you of somebody who sacrificed for you in silence, call them today, not at the next ceremony. Time is the one gift none of us can earn back. And if this journey touched your heart, share it with someone who needs the reminder, and subscribe for more stories about family, second chances, and the quiet strength it takes to choose love over pride.